Hi, my name's Matt. I work for the Waste Initiatives team at Leicestershire County Council. I'm going to be talking about food waste. Admittedly, food waste isn't the most glamorous of topics, but it is incredibly important, and for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that wasting food is a significant contributor to climate change. In fact, each year, 8 to 10% of man-made global greenhouse gas emissions come from food waste. We're currently living through a climate emergency. That is, we're in a situation in which urgent action is required to reduce the whole climate change to avoid potentially irreversible environmental damage resulting from it. We're now at a tipping point. If we change our behaviour to reduce food waste, it will help us to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. 80% of people in the UK are concerned about climate change, but less than a third of people are aware that wasting food is a significant contributor, or that they have the power to take action at home. Scientists estimate that to bring down greenhouse gas emissions enough to avoid the worst consequences of global heating and the associated climate change, we need to reduce the amount of food we waste by half, 50% by the year 2030. If we're going to meet that deadline, we need to start actively reducing food waste now, and it makes sense to focus our efforts in the places where the bulk of the food waste occurs. 70% of the food wasted in this country each year comes from our homes. Every year in our homes we waste more than double the amount of food wasted by all the supermarkets, restaurants and food manufacturers in the UK combined. This means that taking action to reduce food waste in your home and encouraging others to take action in their homes is one of the simplest yet most powerful things that you can do as an individual, a household or as a family to reduce your carbon footprint. So in this video we're going to look at how wasting food contributes to climate change and some of the science behind it. We're also going to look at what you can do about it. We hope that after watching this video, you'll be motivated to try to reduce food waste in your home, and perhaps you'll encourage your friends, family and neighbours to do the same. The more people the better. If you're watching this and thinking, I don't waste food, please don't switch off just yet. The fact is, everybody eats, and everybody wastes food occasionally. Whether you waste a little or a lot, everybody can take action to reduce the amount of food they currently waste, even by a small amount. If you truly don't waste anything, you can help by telling other people about the link between food waste and climate change and encourage them to follow your example. At the end of the video, I'll highlight some online resources where you can find out more about food waste and climate change, and where you can get additional help, information and practical tips about reducing food waste in your home. So how does wasting food cause climate change? On a very basic level, all living organisms need to take energy into their bodies in order to live. Eating is the way that we do this, and food is our fuel. Plants make this fuel for us via photosynthesis. They capture and store solar energy in chemical bonds in their bodies. The chemicals plants use to store their energy are carbohydrates. They contain carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. To get the energy from the plants, we can harvest them and eat them directly, or we can feed them to other animals which we then eat. The important part is that the energy in foods is stored in carbon-based chemicals, just like it is in fossil fuels such as petrol. These also store energy in chemicals containing carbon and hydrogen. Just like fossil fuels, food has the potential to release the carbon it contains as greenhouse gases. Fossil fuels do this when we burn them and they release carbon dioxide. Food can do it too. For example, when wasted food rots, it releases carbon dioxide and sometimes methane too. Methane is 20 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Burning fossil fuels is bad for the environment, and wasting food is no different. It's just a different type of fuel. It would be an obvious waste of money and bad for the environment if every time we filled up our cars with petrol or diesel, we drove home and then left the car needlessly idling until 20% or 1/5 of the fuel had been wasted. Unfortunately, it's less obvious to people that wasting food has a similar impact, and many people might be shocked to learn that in the UK we regularly throw away 22% or more than 1/5 of the food that we buy. That quickly adds up to a lot of food waste. Every day in UK homes we collectively waste 20 million slices of bread, 4.4 million potatoes, 2.7 million carrots and 3.1 million glasses of milk. I said earlier that we waste 6.6 million tonnes of food each year in our homes in the UK. Now you might have noticed that on the screen it says we waste 4.5 million tonnes of food each year. This isn't a mistake. It's because some parts of the food we buy aren't edible, so we can't avoid throwing them away. Food sometimes comes with skins, peels and bones, which are part and parcel of what we buy in the shops. If we discount the non-edible portions of our foods, we waste 4.5 million tonnes of edible food a year in our homes in the UK. It's hard to imagine what 4.5 million tonnes of anything looks like, but it's the equivalent weight to 12.5 Empire State Buildings. It's enough food waste to fill approximately 66,000 three-bed terrace houses to the brim, or 38 million wheelie bins. It's a lot. It takes an area around the size of Wales to produce all the food and drink currently wasted each year from our homes, and collectively it costs us 19 billion to buy the food we waste. The food we waste produces 36 million tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions each year. Of course, different foods have different amounts of carbon invested in them, and so they all have slightly different carbon footprints. Essentially, this means that wasting some foods is worse for the environment than wasting others. Let's use an apple as an example. An apple grown in a tree in your garden is likely to have a smaller carbon footprint than an apple grown on an intensively managed orchard in another country. This is because your garden-grown apple is likely to have grown using sunlight, rainwater, and maybe a bit of compost. On the other hand, the apple grown intensively overseas, as the majority of apples sold in the UK currently are, is likely to have had a lot more resources invested in it in order to get it to you. These are likely to include water, fertilisers and pesticides applied to it as it's growing. Petrol or diesel is likely to have been invested powering the machinery used to harvest the apple. It's likely to have been washed, dried and maybe waxed using additional water, chemicals and electricity. It may have been packaged and made ready for shipping between a processing site and an airport or a dock ready for export by air or ship, again, or using precious resources. And on import, it's likely to have been transported via a HGV to a temperature-controlled warehouse to be quality checked and perhaps repackaged, and from there transported in another HGV to a supermarket, where many shoppers will be using cars to transport themselves and their food home. At each stage in that journey, additional, often non-renewable resources are being added to the apple, and those resources are wasted if we then don't consume the apple. The environmental impact of our foods goes beyond the carbon locked in the food itself, but also incorporates the resources and the emissions associated with the growing of it, the packaging, the transportation, manufacturing, and the retail, and so on. So whatever a food's carbon footprint, whether it's big or small, wasting it represents the release of unnecessary climate-changing gases. As a general rule, for every 1 kilogram of food wasted, between 2.53 to 7.66 kilograms of unnecessary greenhouse gases are emitted. To put that in context, sending just a single kilogram of food waste to landfill, where it will rot down to produce methane gas, produces the same emissions as landfilling 25,000 half-litre plastic bottles. In Leicestershire, we waste close to the UK average amount of food. As a county, we waste around 55,000 tonnes of food each year. This 55,000 tonnes of food waste is responsible for the release of anything between 139,000 to 421,000 tonnes of avoidable greenhouse gas emissions each year. If we're going to play our part in tackling climate change, we need to reduce that by at least 50% by the year 2030. This is a photograph of food wasted by one Leicestershire family over the course of a week. The family had been challenged to collect their food waste separately so they could get a sense of what sorts and how much food they were wasting. Once they could see their food waste all together, they realised that they were wasting more than they were comfortable with and decided to do something about it. After just 2 weeks of trying, the family managed to reduce the amount of food they wasted by 96%. Saving them a considerable amount of money from their food shopping bills and dramatically reducing their carbon footprint. The family managed to make changes quickly and without too much effort, and there are a few simple strategies that are proven to help reduce food waste in the majority of homes. So these are some simple and easy strategies you can employ at home that will help most people to effectively reduce food waste. Plan your meals in advance. Check your fridge and your food cupboards as you plan so you know what food needs using up and when, so you don't buy duplicates of anything you already have. If you can, write your meal plan at the same time as your shopping list and try to include portion estimates on your list so you don't buy too much or too little of something you're going to need. If you know that you're going to have trouble sticking to a rigid meal plan, that's okay. Build some flexibility into it. The aim is to reduce food waste, not to make food boring. Remember to take your shopping list with you and stick to it so you actually buy only what you need. Check the labelling of your food. Things like learning the difference between best before and use by dates is really helpful. Follow on-pack advice regarding storage, preparation and cooking. Store foods appropriately to prolong their usable life, and if you don't know whether something should go in the fridge, the freezer or a cupboard, be inquisitive and find out. Portion again, so you portioned when you went shopping, and double check when you're preparing, cooking and serving your food. Preparing and serving too much food means that you're more likely to waste it. You'll find plenty of portioning guides online, but find out what works for you and the appetites of the people you're feeding. Make the most of your fridge, so make sure it's at the right temperature and check it periodically. Make the most of your freezer too. Most foods can be frozen right up to their use by date, so make use of the freezer space to safely store food that would otherwise go in the bin. Finally, use your stored and your surplus food up. That includes making use of the food you've frozen, and think of leftovers as ingredients for another meal. Don't be afraid to experiment in the kitchen and search for new recipes and inspiration if you do get stuck. Hopefully these tips have been enough to get you started on reducing food waste at your home. But for more information on the links between household food waste and climate change, visit outofdate.org.uk. For practical advice on how to go about reducing food waste in your home, visit livefoodhatewaste.com. You'll find more information about work to reduce food waste in Leicestershire at lesswaste.org.uk. And do look out for Food Waste Action Week in March 2022. Thanks for listening.